All right. So we've got take two of the MTB Performance podcast. I've got my lovely wife, Perrin Brueckner, here. Um, we are recording because the initial audio that we recorded back in must have been August
Yeah, we
was
had no
not
kids.
no kids at the time. But it wasn't great. And some of the hardware that I had purchased to utilize got fried in the process. So a month and a half later, here we are,
Well, this
and
is
we're
why I'm the first guest, right? We're going to work out the kinks so that the
yes,
next guest doesn't have to deal with fried hardware and bad audio. So,
yes. Hopefully, we will
unfortunately,
have.
this time we're not together though. So that's
Yeah, that's
that
the only
sucks.
unfortunate part. So we had to make this work in between work meetings,
Yep.
right after the kids are dropped off at school. So here we are. So, Pear, thank you for joining us.
Always
Good to have you.
nice to be here. So I'm happy I have the opportunity to be the first guest because I think when you first broached the subject of starting a podcast, I thought, well, why? And in what free time will you do this? And why a podcast? Like, what do you have to offer that isn't in one of the millions of other podcasts already out there? So I think this is the podcast and the episode is an opportunity to kind of present what you hope to gain out of this time and what kind of guests you're going to have. And for those that are stumbling upon this podcast and don't know who you previously are, maybe it'll be an opportunity to get to know about you professionally and then maybe a little bit personally since I am the guest today and I have that inside track there. So, do you want to kick it off with, I guess, let's start with who you are, the most basic thing, and how did the annex come to be and how did you get to the position you are right now?
Uh, yeah. So I was an athlete. I loved training in high school and started when I was around 15, 16 years old. Um, I would say I was definitely more of an athlete than a student going through my youth. Everybody
You're such a
identified.
liar. You were a good student.
No, I wasn't. Everybody identified me as an athlete, right? And so sports were my life. Training was a way for me to become a better athlete, but I just really fell in love with it. And so I had the opportunity to play college baseball, although my career didn't go very far because of injuries. Two Tommy John surgeries kind of cut my career short. And, my next biggest passion behind playing baseball was training. So I think after the first surgery, I was hell bent on coming back playing, no problem. After the second, I was starting to think of other options. So I kind of took all the energy that I had devoted to becoming a better baseball player and I kind of focused in on how do I learn this profession of training athletes. And so I did internships. I worked at facilities in Arizona when I was a student at Arizona State that really just kind of specialized in working with baseball athletes. At that time, you and I started seeing each other back in 2003. So you kind of saw me, you and I met right before my first elbow surgery. So you kind of saw the whole evolution from athlete focus to, oh no, this might not work, have to pivot. And, uh, and really just kind of, I took all that energy and really learned and tried to understand as best I could the art of training.
And
So
injury prevention too, right? I think one of the most, as I see, I can't remember how long you've been doing the annex now, but you've had several athletes coming back from injury, whether it's Tommy John or something else. And I think that's been one of those, in hindsight, it was not a blessing that you got injured, but you really had a hands-on opportunity to learn through that process, not once, but twice with those surgeries. So I think it allows you to better relate to athletes that are coming into the gym with that, in that phase of their career, because you've been there and you can really relate to what they're going through and you know what you should and should not do. And I think another thing we can get to later, but you're constantly challenging yourself to stay at the forefront of whatever's the latest thing, whether it's the latest surgeries or the latest rehabilitation things, and you've surrounded yourself with people that are the experts in their field. So I think that's a really cool setup you've got there, and it's put you in a really neat position.
yeah, I think that context has been super important since day one when I opened the facility is, the place I interned, trained, and worked at in Arizona was a facility that specialized in taking athletes from post-operative care to back on the field. So I was privy to a lot of really cutting edge training at the time, which was 2003 to 2006.
Yeah.
And, nothing like that had existed in New Jersey. So I was like, all right, I have the opportunity to come back and do this in New Jersey. I feel like I can do a really good job. And that's when you and I moved back, was the fall of 2006.
Right.
And so
And
we
then,
just
yeah,
have,
how did you go into like that's I guess what you wanted to get at, but the annex with its inception, obviously we didn't start at the location you're in now. It's much smaller and much humbler beginnings. So do you want to kind of discuss that a little bit?
yeah. I mean, we started in the basement of an office complex. I think we had like 800 square feet drop ceilings that were
It's
maybe
tiny.
8 feet tall. We had a squat rack, some dumbbells, and yeah, it was just me and one other coach at the time, and it was just, putting in the work, the hours. I think the biggest thing early on as a coach was just getting reps coaching, and figuring out where the holes were in my coaching. What do I need to learn? Certain cases would come my way, and I would, learn by trial, and then I would start to gradually expand my resource network of, practitioners, whether they be massage therapists, nutritionists, physical therapists, doctors, anybody that could really help my athletes. In the last 17 years, I've just been gradually building up that network, because I think it's important as a strength coach to understand what you're good at and where your expertise is and where it ends. And, in our field, we say, you got to stay in your lane. So I think I've maybe earlier on, because my resource network wasn't as extensive, I did a little bit more than maybe what I should have, but that's all I had. But as I've, grown my business and my resource network, I further understand where my strengths are and where they're not. So the ability to refer out to somebody when they need certain care, that's been really important. And that's also another way we've evolved the annex is, we have in-house physical therapists, we have massage therapists, all those resources to our athletes that we previously did not have. But it came over like years and years and years of building relationships.
So I think that's one thing maybe we glossed over, forgot to mention. But when we moved back to New Jersey because you're from here, and you have somewhat of a network, or you had somewhat of a network in place and still do because you are a product of this area, right? So you were raised in Madison, and then you played at Seton Hall Prep, and then Seton Hall for a brief time before you moved out to Arizona. So you had that network in place, and I think that really helped in the beginning, right? Because you had contacts in place to help kind of build that initial base of athletes. And then I think plus the area, right? You were born in Madison, and that we're still we're the next town over, basically, right? With the annex now. And we've always kind of been in that area. So it's really helped to know people and to leverage that knowledge of the area. But I think another thing I want you to touch on is networking hasn't been specific to strength training. You've also been very fortunate throughout the years to have, I guess, what started as parents of clients or some general population. I don't remember what you call them, but you've had a lot of really amazing mentors throughout the years that I hope you're going to invite into this podcast as well to kind of broaden the spectrum of what you're going to cover.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, obviously, I call it the performance project because I think everybody who's trying to improve performance, it's physical, it's mental, it's spiritual, whatever you want to call it. Performance can take on so many different meanings, and there's so many different levers you can pull. Obviously, from my background, I'm heavily influenced by the performance side of things. But I wouldn't be where I am today, both personally and professionally, without the help and guidance of a lot of people who are a hell of a lot smarter than I am. And so fortunate that they were willing to give me their time and energy and support throughout the years. I hope to bring some of them on if they're willing to join us. But it's really just, it's it's really important, if you're young and you're trying to get into something like this, or in a field where you see people doing big things, or just, people who are doing big things in general, like it's, ask them questions, be willing to put yourself in a situation where, you can learn from somebody. And I think I've been fortunate enough to be able to do that. I would say a lot of my mentors are outside of the performance, strength and conditioning field. With our proximity to New York, a lot of guys who have been in Wall Street and worked in finance, guys who have helped me out with a lot of my early like business deals, and, the financial side of building the Annex. I certainly would not have been able to navigate all those challenging times without their guidance. So, those times are really important to my evolution as a businessman, because as a strength coach, going through like a kinesiology major in college, you don't learn any of that stuff, and it's really just you learn by doing it, making mistakes, hopefully learning from your mistakes, and
Mm-hmm.
and I think now, again, similar to the network I've built of practitioners that I refer out for athletes, it's, same thing of building my business. I have people who I lean on to really help cover my blind spots. Again, I know where I'm good in building my business, and I know where I'm not good. And so,
And I think that's equally as important, to self-identify your strengths, but also your weaknesses, and where it's okay to ask for help or ask for someone to come in and give you a little mentorship. I
yeah.
think it's good. So, but that's kind of in theme, right, with this, hopefully with this podcast. So what do you think, Mickey Brueckner as like a high schooler would get out of this podcast? And then what do you think, if you weren't hosting this podcast, what do you think you as a, professional that owns your own training center, what do you think you would get out of this podcast if you were an outsider listening in?
Yeah. So I would hope the 16-year-old Mickey Brueckner, if they listen, would get something
If they
out of it,
listened.
where, hey, it's important to learn other things other than just, training, other than just sports, seeking out knowledge in different ways, always trying to get better in certain ways. Maybe just mindset, growth mindset, things like that, I think are really important. It's a thing that, if you can cultivate that at a young age, I think you can apply that to anything. For me, performance, like I said earlier, I've been able to be around high level performers, whether it's in sports, whether it's the business world. And if you look at a lot of the basics, right? Like the principles are pretty similar across all those disciplines. It's just how you apply them, right? And I think hopefully the younger audience will understand and appreciate the importance of that. Going through different opportunities and treating them as learning experiences. And then, maybe the older population, called the college to professional athletes, understanding more of the performance side. Hopefully we'll get into it.
I thought you were calling yourself the older population here, which caused me to chuckle a bit.
Let's say the 20 to 30 range, which
Got it.
unfortunately I'm no longer in.
No.
So hopefully they'll get some real life, like, tactical knowledge. And I don't want to just bring in like sports performance coaches. I want to bring in, people who have kind of working with like general fitness, because, obviously for me, the way I train as an athlete changed when I became like an adult, a father, a business owner. Like there's a lot of different competing demands. And so addressing some of those things and, providing some real life tactical experience, and really just tangible things that people can take away and utilize in their day-to-day life.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think, somebody my age who's, it's maybe some, long-term, hey, learn from my experiences. It's one of those things where hopefully my context and experience can provide some value to people. But again, I'd love to bring in people like nutritionists, mental coaches, talk about business, talk about sports performance, talk about performance in general. And, hopefully anybody can really get something out of it, because again, those principles applied in the right direction, can be really applied to anything. So that's the general approach or goal.
So covering, I guess, the life cycle of training in its entirety, right? Obviously, you're not super old, but you've gone from young athlete to college athlete. We're serious about, at a serious level with D1, and then past that prime of college athleticism and how your training has evolved and then how your inputs have evolved, right? I'm sure your nutrition now is much, I remember your early days in college of nutrition and how strict and structured all your eating was, which I thought was incredible because I don't think when many people picture maybe like a college junior or something and what they're eating, it may not be as refined as someone sitting there weighing out all their food to make sure they were getting the proper inputs, but you were um, super strict on that. And then now that you're not in your 20s anymore, and now that we have 3 kids, the diet has changed significantly, but it's still a really good balance, I think, between what you want to be focusing on your inputs versus the external influences of having kids and what's around and how easy it is to kind of eat quickly. So I think having nutrition would be a really fun input to hear on this podcast.
Yeah, I think with all of this stuff, there's optimal, right? If you're truly looking to optimize every facet of your life, yeah, you can do that. But then what's realistic, what's practical? And I think, as you get older and you have way more competing demands, it's really practically speaking what can be done. And I think sometimes people get, paralysis by analysis, later in life when they look at getting into fitness or getting back into fitness. There's so many different options, and a lot of times, they just become paralyzed with those different options.
It's
so they don't,
overwhelming.
so
Yeah.
they do nothing. And I think, again, providing context, because I went through that shift too. After,
Yeah.
Duke was born, I hit a point where I was like, all right, I have to make a change. And so I basically went all in on getting back into training hard and, not being perfect with everything, but, what do they say is, perfect is the enemy of good, or, something like that, where like, if you're trying to
Yeah.
be perfect in everything, you're not going to get any traction. So
I
I
think
think
that's an
getting,
important thing though, like you said, you needed to make a shift. And I remember you coming to me saying like, I need to get serious about training. I'm gonna get a trainer. And I remember going, but you are a trainer. Like, what do you mean? You're gonna outsource a trainer. You are a trainer. Why can't you do this? But for you, it was like there was a different thing offered there, right? It was a sense of accountability, and I think initially when you signed up, it was like a group thing or a partner thing, right? So you had
yep,
someone else there pushing you. So that's another element of training, right? I think you and I are very competitive in everything we do, whether it's a sports thing, like our first dates was bowling, and I just wanted to beat you so bad. You bowled left-handed, which is not your dominant hand, and you still beat me, and I was furious. But from that to board games, like, right, we challenge ourselves constantly, but I think that's really good, right? And that translates even into the gym. If you're doing reps next to someone, you're going to push yourself harder because you've got not peer pressure, because that sounds negative, but you've got, someone else maybe pushing you to do your best, as opposed to maybe if you were just doing it on your own, you may not have that extra level of, whatever it is to move you past to that extra rep or that extra weight or whatever it is. But you're doing it in a controlled environment there at the annex, which I think is great because safety, you're always looking to push your athletes to get faster or stronger or whatever, but safety and injury prevention has always been at the forefront of everything you do, which I think is super important. There's no point in being super fast if you're sitting on the sidelines because you got injured. So, um,
absolutely.
I wanted to touch on something. I talked about the life cycle of you as an athlete, but you as a father now and a parent, where your children are, as you've seen our schedule, every day is a new sport or a new practice, new game. So how is that for you now in this phase of your life with that, you're a coach now, but you have parents, or I'm assuming different people coming up to you asking questions. Having kids, is that change your answers or your perspectives to some questions you may have had posed to you before when we were not in this situation?
Yes. This is a whole nother podcast in and of itself, but to try to be as short as possible, my because of my perspective now as a father, I can definitely empathize with parents who just want the best for their kids. However, it's challenging to deal with parents who, maybe from a self-awareness perspective, have built up their kids, and I'm guilty of it too. I probably do the same thing with my own children. And so I think in those scenarios, it's just, hey, what's the long-term goal with these athletes, and what's the most important thing, right? Is it becoming a good human being, becoming a good, productive, like, person of society? Like, hey, when an athlete leaves this gym, are they going to be a good person? Like, am I giving them good life skills
Mm-hmm.
to go out into the world? And I think training did that for me, um, because it taught me accountability. It taught me, hey, if I actually have the patience to work towards something over and over and over again, do the boring, monotonous stuff day in and day out,
It's the
that stuff.
discipline too, right? That's
Yeah.
embedded within that practice.
Yeah.
And I know we've been so blessed over how many years did you say you've been at the Annex? 17?
17.
Oh, we've been so blessed throughout the years. We've had so many athletes come through whichever doors of whichever spot we were at, because this is our third location, right? Yeah. Um, and you've seen some of them go on to be incredible college and professional athletes, and some that didn't play past college but are incredible humans, like no question, that have come back and trained as and they're parents now, and it's insane. But we have been so blessed to kind of been a part of their lives from high school or middle school on. And I think a lot of them you now include as mentors, right? Like you may have once been their coach or trainer for whatever they were looking to obtain during their time at the Annex, but now they're friends and we consider some like family, and you've made relationships that we've all benefited from. Like the kids obviously know a bunch of athletes really well, and you've created such a good not, and I don't mean just you, but the Annex itself, right? We have a wonderful staff there with a bunch of trainers that everyone seems to have a different specialty or different input that makes the entire staff stronger as a whole. And I think you all have created such a good environment there, and you're cultivating something where as soon as you walk in those doors, there's a clear expectation of what is expected of you when you're there, and there should be a clear understanding of what the trainers expect of them, and what's no one's there to waste anyone's time. You're there to get better, both as an athlete and as a human, right? Just as a general a general person, be a good human. So I love that about the Annex. I love taking our kids there when we have the time, which recently is not as often as it used to be because they've got all their sports everywhere. But it's just a wonderful place to kind of walk in and be your best, and you've got a support team there that everyone's kind of rooting for you. And with the resilient guys that you've got there on for PT, like it's such a wonderful group because you have immediate experts on site to kind of bounce ideas off of and stuff. And I love that place. It's wonderful. I don't go there as often as I'd like, but I love it there.
Yeah.
Um,
I think having all those people who are have one, like, shared common goal, I think it allows us to be innovative. They're right across the hallway. If I have questions, I go talk to them. If there's an athlete that we're collaborating with, I talk to them. There's real-time communication. And that was always, the goal was to mimic that of like a professional organization. And so I think, you're right. Yeah, it's so special to see kids who I started with as like freshmen in high school, like, prepubescent boys who are now fathers training in the Annex in our adult fitness. And it's
yeah.
to see that evolution. It's really special because, like, these guys, they go out and play sports, then they go to college, then they start a professional life, then they start a family, and then they come back, and you keep touch with them along the way. You see them over holidays, and they stop in when they're home, and um,
And their shared experiences is something that, only adds to the overall sense of community there, right? Because if someone comes in and has a certain situation that maybe you personally or none of the trainers have personally dealt with, you have this huge resource base where you can say, like, I had an athlete once that dealt with that. Let me try to put you in contact with them. You know what I mean? And it's just awesome. It's really wonderful.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the main things that makes it so special when you have
And I
former
think sorry to interrupt you. I think the respect shown between you and your employees, like your trainers, and then you versus the resilient employees, I think translates because I've been in there once when we were there more often and we knew who the athletes were and which schools they went to. You'd have, it's like, for example, baseball players training side by side and encouraging each other, but they're from completely different schools, and on the field they are not friendly. But at the annex, there's that carried over respect that I think is demonstrated from the staff, and so I think that's wonderful too. Maybe our kids will one day have that same level of respect if they're influenced by the environment at all. We'll see.
Absolutely.
But yeah, well, I wish you a ton of luck with this podcast. I think it's going to be wonderful. I will definitely be listening in.
Thank you. And
Cisco.
I'll definitely have you back maybe
Oh, we'll see.
a year from now.
It took us 2 months to get this one launched, so we'll see if we can coordinate better. And hopefully, your next guest doesn't have this, telemarketer headpiece like I have to wear for work. But it worked, and I'm so grateful that we had this time to kind of flesh out what you hope to accomplish. And it's nice to get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, appreciate you doing this.
No problem.
Who better than you? I mean, like I said, you've been with me for the whole evolution. You've seen the whole,
Yeah. At some
athlete.
points, it was terrifying. I think I can share a few quick. I remember we got married in 2008, which is the same year you moved into the second larger annex, right? From the basement. And I remember thinking, like, these are such big life changes. Like, what are we doing? Um, but, I believed in you then, and I believe in you now. Even when we walked into the location you're in now, I remember walking through those back garage doors going, this is insane. Like, it's way too big. We're never going to fill this space. What have we done? Like, what is he doing? Because we personally have invested so much into it, not just financially, but emotionally into. We were the first cleaning crew, right? At the first two annexes, we would be there mopping like before we had kids after work. So it was long days for us. And with that second annex, what was it, October that we moved in? I can't remember what it was, but within like a few months,
9 years ago this month.
yeah, I remember going, we're never going to fill this, and this is going to be terrifying. And then within a few months, it was like your busy season, and it was like wall to wall kids. And I remember thinking, we need new space. Like, this isn't going to work. And so I, you'd think I'd learned to not question your moves at this point, but I think it's really nice to have that shocking moment every now and then going. And I think we do a good job with each other trying to ground ourselves in the moment, and be like, we need to take pause and look at how grateful we are just to be in this space with the people we have. And I think as time has gone on, we've been better at being more present in that, as opposed to going, I wish we had done this back then, or, I wish we had been more grateful for this. I think right now where we are, we're very grateful for where we've come. And I don't think I will question your next few moves, because I mean, some have been great and some have not worked out, but throughout it all, I think you've taken the ones that haven't worked out, and we've learned from them to be better poised for whatever our next move is. You're going to have some misses, but we've had an awful lot of hits, and so we're very, very lucky.
Yeah.
But yeah. Alrighty. Well, thanks,
Appreciate
honey.
you.
This was fun. No
All right.
problem. All
Thanks,
right.
folks.
Good luck.
Yep.
All right.